get into this episode, I do want to acknowledge that I'm still trying to figure out the best way to produce these episodes. And the technology around recording and things like that is not my strong suit. I can do kind of the bare minimum. So I realize the sound in every episode is not, probably not the best it could be if I was in a studio. So either like a fine wine, this podcast will get better, or like an aged cheese, it might get tastier, but it might get stinkier. So I'm not really sure. I'm loving what I'm doing, but I really don't have a handle on this production stuff. So I hope that you will bear with me as I muddle through all of this. Today's episode is in many ways an ode to the teenager years. And I've been thinking a lot about that time in my life, partly because I have a teenager at home and partly because I work with teenagers in my job. I look at them sometimes and I think, wow, like I used to be that age. And sometimes I look at them and I think, I don't even imagine what it must be like to be a teenager today with all the technology and all the things that have changed. But I do think in many ways our experiences are, minus the cell phone bit, really similar. The other inspiration for this episode is 90s music. I do a lot of driving, and I rotate through music and podcasts. And sometimes I get a real hankering for music from my adolescence. And music is just so powerful, right? It's amazing how it can almost instantly transport you back to a time when you felt different, you looked different, like everything was different in your life, right? It doesn't trigger just like a simple memory. It triggers like all the senses of that memory. And it triggers the feelings. I'm always amazed at how certain songs can bring me right back to not only the memory but the feeling too. Like I can feel exactly the way I felt in that moment. And that is just mind-blowing to me. We hear stories of patients who have different brain diseases being able to tap into memories when old music is played, which is just another reason the brain is so fascinating. So 90s music is also the inspiration for this episode. So recently I decided to re-listen to the Counting Crows August and Everything After album, which was their first album. Some of you might be familiar with the song Mr. Jones, which I think got quite popular probably around like 1993 or something. I don't know that much of their other songs from that album became famous. I became obsessed, but really there was only one or two songs in that album that I think got really big at that time. I discovered Counting Crows when I think I was probably around 13. August and Everything After, I think, had been out for a year or two. And it became the soundtrack of my teenage years. I listened to lots of other music. I had a very eclectic music collection. I loved hip hop. I loved Tupac. I dabbled in like alternative music. I listened to The Watchmen. I listened to Sloan, some other folks. But Counting Crows were kind of home base for me. And whenever I was struggling, I always came back to that album. So as I listened to this album end to end, I was reminded of two very distinct things. One is that teenagers are really weird, and I was no exception. I did some really weird things as a teenager. But I also was thinking about just how as a teenager, so much of your life is trying to figure out where you belong. And as we kind of move through this uncomfortable, unpredicted time in our lives, we're constantly just trying to figure out. It's such a transformative time. And so many teenagers, music is central to that, right? Even with my own son, I look at the music he's gravitating towards and like how that represents what mood he's in that day. I look at school now that we do have cell phones and AirPods, just how much the students in my school rely on music kind of to get them through this point in their life. And so, when I was younger, I do remember the older generation always talking about, you have to enjoy the teenage years. It's the best time of your life. I don't really think my generation would say, I don't think my generation talking to teenagers would say that. These days, I think we have maybe a bit more of an honest response to the teenage years. I think we generally stick with, it is probably one of the most challenging times in your life because there's so much transformation happening. There's lots of good things, but it's really, really hard. And most people that I talk to, you could not pay them to go back to their teenage life. You could not pay me to redo my teenage years. Even though there were some awful things that happened in my teenage years, there were some wonderful things that happened in my teenage years. There isn't an amount of money you could give me that would make me want to do that again. And that's, I think, the truth for a lot of people. And if you've listened to if you have listened to my podcast before, you know that I didn't have a traditional childhood. But I do think these kind of two aspects of adolescence are pretty consistent. Whether you had a childhood like mine that had lots of challenges or lots of trauma in it, or whether you had a more traditional, you had a strong family network and lots of people around you, and you didn't have lots of trauma. I do think being weird and trying to figure out where you belong are pretty consistent. So I figured I'd start off with a little glimpse into how weird I was as a teenager. And when I say weird, I don't mean like different in that, like weird is good. I don't mean weird in a negative way. I think what I mean when I say weird is like, I did some eyebrow lifting thing, right? And even like in my job now, there's a look that I give students at school, probably at least once a day, where I slightly tilt my head, I scrunch my eyebrows, and think silently, why? Why did they just do that? And often I'll look around for another adult to see, like, did you see what I just saw? And are you tilting your head too? Because I do think there's so many moments where, as a teenager, like, you just do things and you don't really think about why or what it means. And so to others around you, it can look kind of like, what? What is that about? So I don't mean weird in a negative way. I mean it in a lovely, wonderful way, but also kind of eyebrow lifting, head tilting. Why would someone do that? So let me give you an example. When I was 13 or 14, so I lived in a group home, and this is going to be relevant, I would put on the Counting Crows album on my CD player, and probably most of the people listening to this know what a CD player is, which is awesome. And I would crawl under my bed and write the lyrics to each song on the wood under the bed. So it didn't have kind of a spring base. It had like basically a piece of plywood. And I would crawl under there with a pencil, and I would turn the music up as loud as I was allowed to have it. And I would write the lyrics of songs under the bed. I think I like the coziness of being under the bed and, living in a group home. There wasn't always a lot of privacy. I did have my own bedroom, which was lovely. But I often was trying to, I think, escape just kind of the chaos of living in a group home. But it's still pretty weird. Like, it's a weird thing to crawl under your bed when you're 14 years old and write the lyrics to songs on the bed. I'm pretty sure I probably wrote every word to almost every song. And every once in a while, I actually imagine the staff. I mean, this was almost 30 years ago. The bed must have been replaced by now. At some point, someone would have taken apart that bed and flipped up that piece of wood, and underneath it would have been all these lyrics from this one Counting Crows album. And I can just imagine, I mean, the staff probably aren't even the same anymore, so like no one would have any context. It would just be this kind of weird thing they found. Hopefully, fingers crossed, I didn't write anything else under that bed, but it's definitely not beyond the realm of possible. But a weird hobby. This wasn't the only weird Counting Crow tradition I had, so buckle up. So my best friend in my teenage years was someone I met. We both moved into the group home. I actually think she moved in like one day after I moved in. And we both had to navigate kind of group home life, which can be really chaotic and have a lot of drama, right? So you're living with 8 or 9. We lived in a girls' group home, so 8 or 9 girls. All of us having had really challenging life experiences that have brought us to the point of living in a group home. And it was not always a place that was calm. And there was just a lot going on. And so we became pretty inseparable for years. And later on in life, when we moved out and we were adults and in the work world, we actually lived together. So we both had to navigate this group home life together. We shared pretty much everything. And honestly, I don't know I would have made it through the group home without her. Her favorite band was Oasis, and she and I would talk and dream about meeting our favorite bands. So we talked about all the ways we might accidentally run into them, what we would do if we did run into them, what we would say. But the weirdest thing we ever did is we would sit at a table with mugs of hot drinks, probably like hot chocolate, or we didn't really drink tea, but some kind of hot thing. And we would pretend we were in relationships with the lead singers of our favorite bands. We would put on fake poshy accents. Hers would almost always be British, maybe French, because I think she had I think her dad was French. So we would put on these like fake poshy accents and have whole conversations as if they were our boyfriends or our husbands. We even had weird little sayings, which I can't actually remember what they were, but they were little sentences that we would say that would trigger like, oh, do you want to go do that thing that we do? And maybe if she's listening, she'll actually remember what that was. I can't remember what it was. But we would sit at the table and have whole conversations about like, what did you do on the weekend and where are you guys going? It was, honestly, when I think about it now, it's kind of a really strange thing for us to do. But, while other girls in our house might have been fighting, we were living out our fantasy lives at the kitchen table, trying to imagine our lives were different from how they were. I mean, so much of that was about how do we transport ourselves to a different life? And it was hilarious. I mean, we knew it was silly. We laughed hysterically. Sometimes we would have to stop our little chat or our tea date because we were laughing so much, and then we would restart again. And it brought me so much joy. Like, just thinking about it now brings me joy thinking about it. Like, I love that I had someone in my life that we could do that silly stuff with and be weird teenagers. And I can imagine what the staff must have thought walking through the kitchen as they listened to us talk in poshy accents about men that were like 20 years older than us. I can imagine some head tilts, some questioning looks. But we were really lucky. We had like really wonderful staff in that group home that nurtured us as best as they could, despite the kind of complex living situation that we were in. But it definitely must have raised some eyes for sure. And I can remember all the things we did around our band. So we became obsessed. And back then, in the old days, as my son likes to say, because he calls me elderly sometimes, we would get an allowance of $7 a week, basically $1 a day, if we did all of our chores and we followed all of the rules. And we would save our money to buy their albums when they came out. Now, we didn't have the internet. I don't even know if at that time there was a computer in the house, but we definitely did not have the internet. The only way you could find out if an album was coming out was you listened to the radio or you watched Much Music. Like, that's how you figured it out. So we would save our money, and when we got enough money to buy a new album, we would head down to Sam the Record Man, which isn't even a store anymore. I can remember when it closed. And we would buy that CD. You'd have to go in. There'd be rows and rows and rows of like CDs and records. There might have even still been tapes back then. It's hard to know. We would save all of our money and we would head down there and we would buy that album. Because music was the thing, right? We didn't have Apple Music at the tip of our fingers to just look up Watchmen or Sloan. We had to actually go buy those albums, and then sometimes we would like copy those albums and burn those albums once computers came out and you could do that. But I don't think my teenage weirdness was limited to my favorite band. I was definitely very clumsy. I would trip and fall for like no reason at all. I remember once walking to school and I tripped as I was crossing the road, and I got up like quickly and was trying to be nonchalant because there was a car right there. And then I got to school and I put my hand in my bag to pull out my binder. My applesauce had broken all over everything. So I was very clumsy. I had a lot of weird accidents like that. And a lot of, questionable choices of clothes and haircuts, primarily as I tried to fit in. Much of my teenage years was trying to be cool, but not too cool, but just cool enough to not be completely on the outside. I definitely didn't want to be part of the trendy kids, though, because in my mind, they were snobby. What I realized later in life is that all of us, regardless of which group or clique we were in, were muddling through that period of time. The trendy kids were struggling through it just as much as the techie kids were, but we all kind of looked at each other thinking everyone else had it together. I mean, isn't that the big lie that you tell yourself as a teenager? That other people have figured it out and you just need to work harder, right? If you just have the right clothes, or you just have the right makeup, or you do your hair the right way. But it's, it's a big lie. And you don't realize that when you're a teenager because nobody has it together. And I think I probably felt really similar when I was a new mom. Oh, all these other moms have it together and I don't have it together. The reality is we are all just trying to navigate life. And life is hard and life is joyful. And life throws curveballs at us all the time. And we are just trying to get through it collectively. And some people have more resources than others, and some people have more privilege than others. But it's hard. Like, life is a hard thing to move through. So as a teenager, for me, I couldn't figure out, I didn't fit in one group. So I ultimately went with the strategy of be nice to as many people as you can be. If they were nice people, I wasn't, people who were mean, I did not friend those people. I had no time for that. But generally, be nice to the people around me. In general, make connections with people or whoever was around me. And ultimately, that meant that I kind of floated across lots of groups. So I could kind of go through in each of my classes. I knew people, I had people I could chat with. I didn't kind of stick to just one group. And as I went through the process of figuring out how to be a human in my teenage years, I made very questionable choices. I made shoe choices based on crushes that I had, which looking back seems... And it's just it's a weird thing to do. Oh, he has a certain type of shoes, I should get those shoes. That's kind of a weird thing. I cut my hair to stand out, which I very quickly regret when I was a kid. I went from kind of kid clothes to baggy oversized clothes to fashionable preppy clothes in a span of 1 year. To the point where people in my class were also grappling with, like, who are you? Like, what is this transformation you're making with your clothes that we can't figure out? I tried to keep a really low profile, but I was also really fierce inside and really sticking to that, like, I'm going to finish school. I'm going to do well in school. I'm not going to be this youth and care statistic. So I had this fierceness that was still inside of me. But I also did really strange things. Like, there was twice in my high school where I threw guys into lockers. And I was not a bully. I was really quite a gentle person, but there were two situations I was in where one was I was walking through the hallway and there were some guys roughhousing, and one of them was about to kind of land on top of me, and I just took him and threw him and kept walking. And then the second time was not actually, it was shortly after that, probably in that same month, where a friend, took my purse and was playing keep away with my purse. And keep away is like the worst game. There's something about keep away that ignites so much anger inside of you that I just grabbed him and threw him against the locker. And honestly, I was one part really embarrassed because I didn't want to be a girl who showed her strength. And part of me deep down was a little bit proud that I, didn't take shit from someone. But ultimately, when you're a teenager, you're not trying to stand out a lot of the time. And so here I had done these two things that made me stand out. And I was really kind of mortified. Looking back, I wished I could have used like a notice, reflect, act model in that moment and just taken a breath and not throw them into the locker. But at that point, it's not a skill that I had. So I have enough space from these stories that I can tell them, I can laugh at myself. But the reality is that your teenage years are freaking brutal for a lot of people. Your hormones are raging. You act like a weirdo a lot of the time. You're sad, then you're angry, then you're laughing for no reason at all. You can't figure out where you want to be. You can't figure out who you want to be. You're bored, but you don't want to do anything. You desperately want to be an adult so you can make all your decisions, but also that feels like really far away. And so for me, I always find it helpful to think back on these times because I have a teenager and I want to be able to empathize with his experience. I work with teenagers and I think it's helpful. It certainly helps me be patient more often to just take a moment and realize like, wow, like they're in this really hard time right now. And even though, they said that thing or they're being snarky with me, there's probably a lot of things that feel out of their control. And every once in a while, I can get to a place either with my own son or with kids at work where I can drop a little of my own, nugget of knowledge. And sometimes they take it in. I don't know that they'll ever remember it, but I think they take it in. So I'll say things like, life does get better. I know things are hard right now, but it doesn't go on forever. It's getting to that adult stage is really awesome, and I will always say to them, it's not magic. You don't turn 18 and suddenly all the hard stuff goes away, but you do grow into yourself a little bit more. I'll often say to young people, you don't have to have it all figured out right now. You're going to make choices. You're going to change your mind. You're going to make new choices. And your life is going to go on like that, right? It's going to kind of meander through in different directions. And hopefully, if I drop those nuggets in the right moment, someone will hear it and they'll go, you know what? Like, I'm going to hold on to that. Because I don't remember people saying that to me. I don't remember people saying, it's not going to be this hard forever. And I wish someone had said that to me. When I think about the things I wish I had had from adults, one was, I wish they, like I said, I wish they said things like, this is a really hard time in your life and that's okay. And that's normal. I wish they said, hold on to your weirdness because there is something really brilliant about some of the weird things that teenagers do. And I also just wish they listened. I think as an adult, it's easy to look back and say, oh, someone cooked for me or made my bed or did my laundry. But that's not really the stuff that matters in those years. What matters is who is there for you. I mean, I had transformational experiences in my teenage years. Some of the people who are my closest friends now were mentors to me. So we do have really wonderful things that happen, but you can get bogged down in the messiness of it all. When I try to think about when I started to come out of that cloud of adolescence, I have a really distinct memory when I kind of started to see the light, right? So you're going through the throes of teenage years, and then there's kind of a point in grade 11 or grade 12 where you start to come out of it a little bit. And I can distinctly remember when I started to see that light. So I was probably in grade 11 or 12. I was walking from the bus to school, which was about a 7-minute walk. It was winter, and I was so cold because I had no gloves and I had no hat. Imagine a teenager with no gloves or hat. Now, I did have a jacket, and I do see a lot of teenagers that don't even wear jackets. I was wearing a jacket. And as I walked, I can remember thinking, what is wrong with me? Why would I not wear a hat? Who cares what my hair looks like? Like, literally, no one is going to care what my hair looks like. And for me, I think that was the moment that I started to transition away from caring what others thought and the beginning of figuring out that fitting in isn't even real. It's actually an illusion. What's real is figuring out who you are, what you value, and what you want in life, and then doing the things that get you there. And through that journey, you find people and you find places. And, as I left adolescence and started to realize that fitting in was really about feeling good in my own skin and accepting who I am, the rest kind of followed from there. So although I know this podcast is not likely, doesn't likely have a big teenage audience, I would like to say that if you are a teenager, hang in there. It's not terrible forever. And there are really lovely moments, and nudge yourself to enjoy those moments and take in those moments, not just see all the hard stuff. And for the adults out there who have teenagers in your life, don't forget to take a breath when they do some weird shit. Take time to pull out that album from your teenage years to remind you of the weird things that you did or the choices you made. Because I do think despite the change in technology, so much of those experiences are universal. Wanting to fit in, not knowing who you are. So I want to thank you for tuning in to my throwback episode. I do hope it reminded you of your weird self. And as we move through the world on this kind of meandering journey called life, remember that there was once a time when you could never imagine where you are now.